15 years as first a manager and then an executive in education and nonprofit related spaces. And that's where I really became interested in the practicalities of how do we actually make it easier to accomplish our goals, get work done, be able to focus when we need to, all that kind of stuff that are the practical pieces that you don't tend to learn in school, and that I really became interested in as a manager and a leader. So that's my background in this subject matter. Welcome, welcome to the folks who have just joined. You are welcome to add to the chat where you're joining us from and a recent time that you didn't procrastinate on something and what made it easier to do that task when you had planned to do it. Found that very rarely do we all procrastinate on everything. and understanding that difference between where we do and where we don't can sometimes be really helpful in figuring out new strategies that work for you. Yeah, listen, that is real. That's real. But even anything that takes longer than 5 minutes, even that is a cue right there. Like, hey, well, how can I break things down into 5-minute chunks? Because then I probably won't procrastinate on them. So, awesome checklists can be an absolute wonderful thing for some folks, and other people hate checklists like the plague and will procrastinate even making their checklists. So it's so funny how we all can function differently with that, right? I love a good checklist. I've got one in front of me. And I've worked with clients who are like, please, I break out into cold sweat every time I have a checklist. All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump in. Yes, this course is being recorded so that for anybody who wants to be able to access the content later, they are able to. So yes, please make sure that you don't share anything in the chat that you wouldn't want visible on a recording later. All right, so we will jump in. So just a quick heads up that this comes from a course, Spicy Brains Get Stuff Done. The next cohort of that launches on April 29th. There'll be a link to that at the end of the slide deck, and would be delighted to see you all there. But let's really get into the background on procrastination. So we tend to associate procrastination as being a time management issue, but it's really actually just the tip of the iceberg. So yes, it does matter that we have time awareness and we have practical scheduling skills, but if underneath it we don't have the psychological awareness and the emotional regulation, we actually will just continue to procrastinate no matter how amazing we get our time management and time awareness skills. And that's because procrastination starts from our brain's desire to protect us from threats, and stress is a threat. So if we view a task as overwhelming, as scary, or as boring, our brain goes, ooh, that's a threat. That's the equivalent of a tiger in the bush. Let me protect you from that by pushing it away. And it becomes this self-perpetuating cycle, because every time we do that, in the moment that we procrastinate, research consistently shows that our stress levels drop. Like, oh, this game that I'm playing on my phone is so much more peaceful, relaxing, and fun than that task that I'm avoiding. But of course, later, as we all know, our stress levels elevate, right? When we go to return to the thing, it becomes even more stressful, even more overwhelming, or even more boring, precisely because we put it off. And so that's what tends to create this cycle. Like, I don't want to keep procrastinating, but I keep procrastinating. Why is this happening? We also tend to associate, kind of in general culture, procrastination with laziness, but it's actually the opposite that's happening. The typical kind of profile of a procrastinator is actually someone who has really strong perfectionistic tendencies. And we don't tend to associate perfectionism with people who are just like, oh, you know, whatever, cool, however it goes, apathy, laziness, blah. Right? It really actually correlates much more specifically with a psychological trait known as perfectionistic concerns. So where you tend to be particularly concerned about getting everything right, having it done perfectly, and then that kind of fear of failure about a particular task spreads and actually becomes fear of failure, that like there's something wrong with my whole self. Thank you so much, Steph. Yeah, I felt so seen when I started looking at this research as well. And I will say your comment reminds me that one of the things that's really helpful for me is to know what makes a difference for people. And also, of course, you know, as a solopreneur, to have testimonials. So if anybody gets value from anything that I'm sharing today and you're comfortable with sharing it in the chat and saying, you know, by the way, you can feel free to use this as a testimonial, that would be lovely, just as a side note. So anyways, back to perfectionism. When we are really caught up in having really high standards, in being really afraid that we might fail at something, And we have the tendency to think if I fail at this thing, it's actually further evidence that I am a failure rather than I failed at this particular task. Then the procrastination likelihood gets higher and higher. So it becomes really crucial when we're dealing with habitual procrastination to go, how can I de-escalate the threat response I'm having and decrease the narrative that I'm telling myself, essentially, of what this task means. And it's usually happening at kind of a subconscious level. So it can be a little tricky to spot it sometimes. So then how can you shift your response? I like to use a really cheesy acronym that I actually like keep it posted up on my computer because struggling with procrastination is still real for me sometimes too. Do it, right? So what is it that I need to do to be able to do it? Well, the first thing is I need to divide the work up, right? So one of the folks mentioned in the chat, like, gosh, I seem to procrastinate anything that takes longer than 5 minutes. If you can divide the work up into being small, digestible, totally non-overwhelming tasks, then it makes it much easier to take them on. But you can't stop there. That's a piece of advice that a lot of people have heard, and then they get stuck on stalling out just at that. They're like, I made it small, and then I ran away from the whole thing because it was a big pile of small stuff, right? So the O in do it is for open up. It's actually really important if you notice that you've kicked a task more than once from the time that you had originally scheduled it for, to pause. Maybe do some journaling, maybe talk with a friend, maybe talk with a professional. What's going on? Why do you keep finding this task so mind-numbingly boring or so completely overwhelming or so scary, right? Because if you get down at the root cause, then it can change the strategies you use to make it easier to do it. The third thing in do it is to ignore distractions. So it's really important to set up your environment. You want to create those focused environments for work. We'll get into a little bit more examples on that in a second. And finally, T is to talk kindly to yourself. So again, if you want to decrease that threat response in your brain, it means you need to respond kindly. So let me give some more examples of each of these. If you're wanting ways to divide the work, you need ways that are going to start small and help you build momentum, right? Think of a line of dominoes falling. You get it all set up and then you just tilt that first one and the momentum carries the rest of it through. Right, so that 5-minute rule, if it's something you're really dreading and overwhelmed by, then commit to just 5 minutes of work. Like, I'll be honest, that's the only way I ever get anything in my office area cleaned ever is with 5-minute room rescues, because I hate tidying up my office area so much. The only way I can do it is if I set a timer for 5 minutes, put on a song I really love, and I'm rocking out to that song while I'm doing that 5 minutes of cleaning. And then what I find is I build some momentum, right? I'm like, that wasn't that bad. Look, that area of my desk actually looks really nice now. And I can add another 5 minutes and another 5 minutes. So by shrinking it and making it into something that doesn't feel overwhelming, I'm able to start to build that momentum. The same thing applies with a big project at work, right? It's a giant project, but you can instead say, I'm going to set a 5-minute timer. And that 5-minute timer is actually going to be, what does good enough look like by when for this project? And I'm going to redefine it for myself. It's actually especially important if you've had the project defined by your manager or someone above you as to what it looks like, because until you get the chance to kind of own it and internalize it, you're actually going to be more and more likely to keep procrastinating. So those are the kinds of things that can really help when you're talking about the dividing the work. Also, that relates to progress tracking, right? So it's easier for us to keep doing something when we see how we've made progress. I have clients that love to use stickies on a dry erase board to sort the things they're going to do over a given day or week. And then they'll actually keep the stickies in a stack of the things they've gotten done, because it's a chance to be like, oh my gosh, look at all those colorful stickies of the stuff that I got done this week. And that's more rewarding for them than when it's, say, just a digital list and every time they tap it, it disappears. And finally, you can have accountability partners to help you with with doing the dividing in the first place and with celebrating and seeing the stuff that needs to get done once it is divided. So now more on the O of do it. If you're trying to open up and uncover that root cause of the delay, it's important that you do this in a way that is not about critiquing yourself, right? You're just really trying to reflect and understand the why so that you can come up with a solution that actually works for you, instead of just buying into, well, there's only one way to solve this, and it's this other way that I heard about on TikTok, or that I heard about from my manager, or that I heard about from my colleague, right? You've got to figure out the solution that actually relates to the core challenge that's coming up. If that core challenge is boredom, then you need to figure out solutions that will help gamify it. So for instance, I have a client who, the way she gamifies it is she takes her set of tasks on little slips of paper, she puts it in a bowl, And she's purposefully mixed the tasks that she needs to get done that day with some tasks that would be enjoyable to her, like taking a quick walk or taking a doodle break. And then she makes it more playful of like, okay, I've finished the previous thing. I'm grabbing a slip of paper. I don't know what's going to be on that slip of paper, but whatever it is, that's what I'm doing, right? And that makes the whole process a little bit more engaging for her. It helps mitigate the effects of boredom. It's really useful because the reason she was avoiding a lot of those tasks was because of how boring they felt. So by shrinking them down and then by making it more playful in how she selected them, she was able to get around that root cause. That wouldn't have worked for her if it had been a different root cause. So that's why understanding that root cause is really important, and taking that chance to open up with yourself or somebody else about what's going on here can really help to reduce those tendencies to procrastinate. Then the I on ignoring distractions. So there's a couple key things you want to do to make it easy to not get distracted, because when you don't want to do a task and then anything comes into your field of awareness that you could be doing instead of that task, you're going to do it, right? Your brain's going to be like, great, that's awesome. Let me jump to that thing. And it will happen to us subconsciously. We don't even realize how many times. I don't know if anybody else is like me, but you'll be like, oh, wow, I started this thing 20 minutes ago, except I haven't actually done any of it because I did 10 other things instead. So you really want to make a distraction-free zone, right? One of the things that is very tempting to all of us is our phones. And that's even if you have it silent and upside down. If you can see in your eye line, what research shows is that phone even being in your eye line, even silent and upside down, still keeps a part of your brain thinking about what might be on your phone. So get it out of your eye line. Close the tabs on your computer. Turn off any of the like notifications. Exactly, Juliet. So true. Yeah, it's a little harder to turn off the notifications inside our brain, right? One thing that is really helpful for that is I keep a notebook right next to my desk. And the function of this one notebook, its only purpose is for the things I think of while I'm in the middle of doing something else. I jot them down there so that my brain can stop repeating it for me, right? And that allows me to kind of let it go, move on, and then I have a different point where I can go back and look at the things that I've written down in my notebook and schedule where it is in my calendar that I need to actually do them. So making that distraction-free zone is really key. Helping yourself have visual cues that keep you on track, especially if your brain tends to be what distracts you, is also really useful. So having it so they're like timed reminders going off that pull your attention back to the thing you want to be paying attention to, or having some stickies that are right in your eye line, or a whiteboard that you can glance at and it's, you know, got your top 3 priorities for the day. All those can be really helpful visual cues for having the right kind of environment to help you ignore distractions. And finally, making sure you have a good body-friendly setup, right? So we all need movement breaks periodically. We need to have a chair that's not so uncomfortable that all we can think about is how much our back hurts. We need to have decent lighting so that we're able to, you know, focus and pay attention. So all those kind of basic things, making sure your environment is set up is worth a little bit of time if you're having a hard time with procrastination. And finally, the T for talking kindly to yourself. So if you want to reduce that threat response in your brain, then here's what you need to not do. Let me give you a little preview of what the inside of my head looks like sometimes when I procrastinate. Less so now, thank goodness. But it used to be that every time I noticed I procrastinated, the inside of my head would look something like this. Oh my God, you're procrastinating again. What is wrong with you? You're so lazy. You're such a slacker. Why can't you just focus? A way that I would never speak to my friends, my colleagues, my employees, but felt totally free to speak to myself that way. Well, predictably, what does that do? Adrenaline goes up, cortisol goes up. It confirms to my brain that this is in fact a threatening activity. And now not only is the task threatening, but even noticing that I was procrastinating on the task is threatening. And the whole threat response gets blown that much more out of proportion. If I want to reduce my ability, I'm glad I'm not the only one, Mark. If I want to reduce my threat response, then I have to respond to myself in something more like, oh, got it, I'm procrastinating again. Okay, what's going on? Do I need to change something about my environment? Is there something that I'm actually feeling really bored or freaked out by? Did I not break this down into small enough pieces? Like, why am I procrastinating? In a kind of friendly, curious, open way. And that gets the right neurochemicals firing in my brain to allow me to pause, reflect, learn, and then be able to actually start on the task. And that won't happen if I respond to myself in an unkind way. Okay, So I mentioned before that this comes from the course Spicy Brains Get Stuff Done. I just wanted to give a little bit more info for anybody who wants it, and then we'll go into Q&A. So this course is a 3-week, 6-session course that's really going to be focused on building your personalized toolbox to really figure out what are the strategies that are going to help me manage my tendency to procrastination, be able to focus when I need and want to, be able to engage in decision making that works for my brain, be able to maintain motivation instead of having those, peaks and dips, and other topics like that. So the next cohort begins April 29th. And for people who are part of the lightning lesson, whether you're listening to it after the fact or you're listening to it live right now, you can use this code to register with a 10% discount. All right. So now I would love to hear your questions. You can feel free to raise your hand and then come off mute once I call on you. You're welcome to drop something into the chat. If it's something that really is private and you don't want to be in a recording, you're welcome to email me afterwards at me@beccablock.com. And if you're like, hey, I want some more resources, there is in that same course link that I already shared with you, there is some resources for how to build and maintain motivation overall when you scroll down towards the bottom of the course link. So I would love to hear your questions or comments. I hear that about taming the inner screaming child. That is so real. I think that's that piece of like stopping the task and then starting some free flow. My tongue is procrastinating and being able to pronounce things. That free flow writing so that you can set the thoughts aside, right? That is one of the recommended strategies if you look at sort of research on procrastination, is like if you've pushed a task more than once and you're now sitting down trying to do it again and still can't do it, then at least write about why can't I do this task, or what is it that's coming up for me as I'm trying to do this task, rather than once again switching completely off of it to instead play a game, call a friend, do productive procrastination by like cleaning your kitchen suddenly, even though you hate cleaning your kitchen, all those other kinds of things. So yes, I think that's such a good question, Amber. So how do we balance speaking kindly to ourselves while still staying accountable and not giving up? I think it matters to think about what is the kind way, like if you ever had a particularly kind teacher in high school, or say like athletics coach, or if you've observed a particularly good like spiritual leader inside any kind of religious discipline, you'll notice that there's this difference between kindness and niceness, right? So in social settings, it might look like niceness would be, well, I'm just going to be polite and not tell that person that their fly is unzipped. And kindness would look like letting them know, hey, your fly is unzipped, because you realize it would be worse for them later to continue to walk around the whole day with their fly unzipped, right? And I think there's the same thing in the way that we talk to ourselves. I'm actually not being kind to myself if I just let myself off the hook and I say, it's so understandable you're not doing this, just don't worry about it, right? I'm not being kind, because if it's something I need to get done, then I am not being kind to myself by just not doing it. But I am being kind to myself if I can say, hey, this is proving really hard to get done. Let's sit down and think about why, what's going on, what can we do to make it easier to get done? Is there a friend that we can loop in on this so they can kind of be an accountability partner? Is there somebody that I could talk to think this through? Can I do a bit of journaling? Can I get up and take a walk while I'm thinking about it to break down the task, right? What would really help me is very different than the kind of delusional version of self-care that sometimes happens, especially in American culture, where like self-care is going and hiding in the bathroom with expensive bubble bath, right? And like that doesn't really actually help you in the long run. Nothing against expensive bubble bath for those who love it. So great question. Does that help answer your question, Amber? Awesome. So Steph, you ask, do I or the group use digital products to track? And if so, what systems do I use? So I have found for some people this is great, and this helps me. When it's something where there's going to be like a repeat task, where I know I need to do a task repeatedly, I find these especially useful. So I like to use the cheesy free version of an app called Finch, because I like the cute little animated bird and I like the cute little stuff that she gets. And I have, repeat habits that I'm trying to build and tasks I'm trying to get done on a daily or weekly basis, and having it in there and getting to see the bird be happy because she got some pretty stones works for me. It's a way of tricking the part of my brain that likes gamification and likes pretty things into doing that. So I'm glad that I'm not the only one. Yeah. So, I've found help with something like that. I've known other people that they use just a paper habit tracker and it helps them. In general, I've found that different systems seem to work for different people, and that the key kind of meta skill is setting your brain up with an orientation towards experimentation rather than an orientation towards, I'm going to try this and then I'm going to risk failing, right? So my mindset is, oh, I'm experimenting. I don't know if this is going to work for me. I'm going to learn from this experiment. I'm going to try the experiment for this long, and I'm going to decide whether or not it worked for me by doing X, Y, Z. Then now I'm not integrating it into any kind of judgment that's going to get in my way of future learning. Whereas if my orientation is, I'm going to try this strategy that I heard about, and oh my God, it didn't work for me, and I knew it. I suck at this. This is terrible, right? Then it again feeds back into that threat response. It becomes that much harder to continue to try and experiment in the future. So that's what I've found is the most important kind of meta tactic. And then within it, there's so many different digital and non-digital solutions that can help. Great. Any other questions or comments? It sounds like people also appreciate the chance to learn from each other's experiences. So if there's other resources, whether they're digital ones like Finch or something else that people have found helpful, please feel free to drop those in the chat as well, because you might spark an idea for somebody else of something they can try. All right. Looks like folks are thinking and mulling a little bit, so I'll give it a little bit more time. Yeah, Carly, you want to come off mute?
Yeah. Hi. This is great. Thanks, Becca. It's interesting. I'm watching and observing some of the questions, and I think it might be interesting to point out the difference between perfection and perfectionism, and being successful.
Yeah.
I think bringing perfection is a construct that's set up in order to keep us way down, to keep us feeling bad about ourselves, to lack imagination, lack creativity, lack some flexibility. Whereas I think being successful, Pay gives a really good example, a requirement of tasks where visual design, where attention to detail is key, or preparing for job interviews, right? You want to prepare to be successful.
Right.
And that's different than the perfectionism, which is the kind of psychological construct that keeps you paralyzed.
Yes.
So yeah.
That's a really good point. And thank you for pointing that out too, Carly, because somehow in my list of the questions, I did not see your question, Pay. So I'm glad that you offered that response, Carly, because I'm looking at the chat, I'm like, oh wait, I missed yours. I think to build on what Carly shared too, that getting really clear on what does success look like to me for this given task, right? So there are some tasks where the bar for success is really high, but it's usually high in a couple particular areas, right? It can also help if you stack rank it. Okay, ideally, I would like it to be that the visual design is amazing, and also that my presentation is on point, and also that my outfit looks just like perfect blend of creativity, professional, etc. And you can sort of start thinking of like all the things that should ideally be perfect. But then if you can start to stack rank and go, okay, if I'm going to prioritize where I'm putting my time, because I have a limited amount of time as a human to do any level of preparation, what's the most important thing, right? So in this case, it sounds like that the visual design, attention to detail, right? Okay, it's really crucial that my attention to detail on the visual design here is spot on. With a job interview, it might be that it's like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm successful, but part of being successful is actually for me to come off comfortable and confident. And I remember working with someone where they were talking about how they would do so much preparation in advance of their job interviews, like 3 to 4 hours of research the day before to refresh themselves about everything about the company and every question they might ask. But by the time they came into the interview, they were exhausted and they were distracted because they were trying to remember all the things that they'd spent so much time doing, right? And when she instead broke it down into, okay, I'm going to refresh my memory. I will do my research, kind of as I'm applying to companies. I will refresh my memory for 30 minutes, a few hours before the interview, so that I remember the key points and the most important questions that I want to be sure to ask in this interview, both to convey my professionalism and to get my sense of whether or not I would want to work at this place. But then I'm going to deliberately prioritize the other part of being successful, which is that I come in relaxed and confident by going to take a walk before the interview and not thinking about and trying to rehash and cram in every perfect thing. And she actually found that her interviews went better after that because, like Carly was just saying, she redefined it in relation to what does success actually look like for me in this, and then how do I prepare for that success? Does that answer your question, Pei?
Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you, and both you and Carly.
Awesome. And thanks, Carly, for jumping in with that. All right, let's see. So Allison, you've asked, do you have any thoughts on procrastination when organizing the task or determining the approach feels like the biggest hurdle? That's real. So this is one where a lot of folks that I work with really actually find the sort of classic Pomodoro technique to be really helpful. And so what the Pomodoro technique is a timing focus technique where you set a timer for 25 minutes, and then you take a break for 5 minutes. Then you set another 25-minute work block, then you take another 5-minute break block. But here's some key pieces to using it that tend to be especially helpful for people who procrastinate. So one is make your first work block start with that definition of success piece, right? So what's my own definition of success? What are actually the most important things to get right in this? It helps that kind of pre-sorting, whereas when you try to jump straight into, like you're pointing out, like organizing the whole task and determining my approach, that can still feel really overwhelming. But if you start with just like, what does success look like at the end? What are the most important things to me to get right? Then that starts to filter through that prioritization in your mind. When you've got that down, then you can say, okay, are there any questions that I actually need to get answered, right? So sometimes as we start to define what success looks like, especially for a work project, we realize, oh, I thought I was clear on what it was that I was doing here. But now as I'm trying to define for myself what a successful outcome looks like, I realize that I actually have a couple questions. And so then frequently that second part of that first 25-minute work block is identifying, who do I need to get more information from, right? Is it something I can access on my own, asynchronously, online, or in work documentation? Is it something where I need to go to my manager or a colleague? Who is it that I need to get clarity from? And when people focus that, then it means now they can start to do that task or organization of like, what steps am I going to take more readily? Because then they realize, well, some of the first steps I need to take is to schedule time to be able to get that information. And I need to schedule time to be able to start breaking down the tasks. The third thing that I've found is really important is to work backwards. Again, this is a standard project planning thing, but it's really important when you're stuck in overwhelm to go, okay, I've defined what the successful outcome looks like. So what does that mean I need to do a week before then? Where do I need to be at? What does that mean I need to be at a week before that, right? So to start breaking down success, moving from the end towards you, starts to make it easier to see the tasks to do along the way, and also the places where you might have questions that need to get answered. Finally, the other important thing I found is when you're taking those 5-minute brain breaks, if you can avoid taking them on a screen, it seems to help people's brains rest and recharge a lot better. And our habit right now culturally is anytime we take a break by flipping open our phone or hopping onto a favorite tab on our desktop or laptop. And what that does is it still keeps that focus mode really active inside our brain, and it's kind of tiring that mental muscle out. Whereas if you can kind of switch that off for 5 minutes by getting up and doing a couple stretches or just walking around your house or petting your animal if you have one, or just stepping outside and looking at a flower, right? Anything like that, it just helps the brain actually rest and reset for a moment before you start again. Is that helpful, and does that answer your question?
Becca, that was great. It looks like there's a question about the course.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so great question, Mark. So my orientation in general is to always keep lecture at a minimum. So I really orient everything towards, all right, let me find 15 to 20 minutes of information that would be useful in helping to spark new thinking. And then the rest of the time is on supported application, right? So for instance, with procrastination, it would look something like we get into some of the content that we've got into today, maybe a bit more details on some of the pieces, depending upon people's questions around exactly how it can show up in different people's brains. But then it's, all right, let's get into what have you been trying so far? What has been working? Under what circumstances? When has it not? Under what circumstances? Now let's design an experiment. Let's give each other feedback on those experiments in order to make sure we're prepared to really tell whether or not the thing we're getting ready to try, we're going to be able to learn from it. And then the next session starts with reflecting on how the experiments of the previous few days went. What did you learn from it? What seems to be working? What doesn't? Making adjustments, then getting into the next content area and repeating. And the reason I do it that way is because this information is out there online. You can spend hours on TikTok or YouTube or SagePub if you want to go for the full academic journal articles like I do sometimes, finding all the information about all of these areas. What tends to be overwhelming and hard is figuring out, how do I make that practical and applicable for my specific life and my specific brain? And so that's where I've found that those kind of group cohort settings are most useful, is in doing that translation and really maximizing the time on that translation. Does that answer your question? All right, so I realize we are now 2 minutes over time. I'm happy to stay on if anybody else has any other questions, anything else you want to chat about. I do have a little bit more time, but that does mark the end of our recorded lightning lesson on procrastination. Please feel free to reach out if you have anything else. Awesome, Hagen. I'm glad to hear that. Great. All right, I hope everybody has a great day. And again, I'll stay on another few minutes in case anyone has any other questions or final things they want to ask or share. And if my helper could stop the recording so that we have